Let's say hi to Tristin Hopper, who's on the line, reporter for the National Post. Tristin, thank you for being here this afternoon.
Oh, anytime. Thank you.
I got to tell you, it's interesting to read the perspective from someone who's not in Quebec, because you're not, as to what this new bill, the Constitution that the CAQ has been working on here, Bill 1, and get your take, because I'll be very honest with you, here in the province, there's been so much else going on. Not just with the CAQ, but with other provincial parties as well. The Liberals are mired in a bit of a scandal now. We had people quitting another provincial party. That to get a take from someone outside the province and realizing what's in this Constitution is really quite eye-opening.
Oh, yeah. I understand it's exciting. It's always going to be more exciting in Quebec than the rest of Canada. So, there was, I think, TVA Nouvelle covered this. So they were mentioning, the National Post is, National Post Tristin Hopper is saying that there's he's critical of the Constitution and he's defaming it as separatist. So I don't really have a dog in this fight. I just looked at the Constitution, and there is if your French isn't too good on legal affairs, there is an English version. I read both versions, but you go into it, and it pretty clearly states there's not a lot of it's an opinion piece I wrote, but there's not a lot of opinion. I'm just pointing out the Constitution very nakedly says it frames Canada as sort of a voluntary. I forget the word they use for it. The federal union. So it really goes out of its way not to refer to Canada as a country. Refers to Quebec as a free national state, a free sovereign state, and essentially just lays it all out. So, I mean, there's been plenty of in Quebec's past, going all the way back to 1995. There's been plenty of pieces of Quebec legislation that's referred to Quebec as a nation, as sovereign, as whatever. But this really gets into detail of saying, we don't have to do whatever Ottawa says. Under this Constitution, we're gonna get rid of the lieutenant governor, and that's going to be the officer of Quebec, and the premier gets to pick whoever that is, and we can pick Supreme Court justices, and we can pick our senators. We're going to pick those. That's not going to be the prime minister anymore. So for all of this to work, you essentially have to go along with what the Constitution is saying, which that Canada is not a country. It's just sort of, it's like the EU. It's actually slightly less powerful than the EU. It's just sort of a central authority, and we do whatever we feel like with federal laws, and we sort of voluntarily participate in federal institutions, depending on how we feel at any particular moment. So it's not a particularly long Constitution, but me looking at the text, I'm probably more versed in the Alberta separatist movement. If the Alberta separatists, or if the premier of Alberta put out something like this, it'd be wall-to-wall coverage. But for whatever reason, it's, as you mentioned, it's not getting a lot of attention in Quebec, and it's definitely not getting a lot of attention in the rest of Canada.
I wanted to just go back to your point. You write in the piece, Canada is defined, according to this Constitution, according to Bill 1, as an association of autonomous states founded on the sharing of the state function and state jurisdiction between two orders of government that are equal and not subordinate to one another. Which, to your point, would allow basically Quebec would allow Quebec to do whatever it wants, and basically would violate federal law, would it not?
Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of federal laws. There could be a federal law drinking game that you go through this Constitution, and as you, that violates that section of the, and then crack open the British North America Act, you die of alcohol poisoning. So I briefly touch on, just to imagine what kind of federal laws this overrides. I touched on two or three in it, but there could be dozens upon dozens. If you just release a document that says, I'm not bound by federal laws, that kind of violates all of the federal laws, does it not?
To the point about, and as I said off the top, we have not had a lot of time to talk about this. It's not been necessarily as big an issue as one might have expected, although maybe articles like this, and there was one in the Gazette here, by the way, that ran on the weekend, which I think, even if you didn't read the whole thing, perhaps this sentence says it all. Basically, Quebec's proposed constitution is a naked power grab on an unprecedented scale, cleverly disguised as a nation-affirming project. Let's hope Quebecers won't be fooled.
Yeah, so that's what the Gazette wrote. So as of my understanding, the criticism you've seen is that, well, if it's a huge power grab, if you're essentially saying, I don't have to listen to federal law, boom, I'm picking the lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
That's going to be my guy now. I'm picking the Supreme Court justices. So if by seizing a lot of power for Quebec, you're also seizing a lot of power for the CAQ. So, as is my understanding, that is the chief criticism. That's if you become an autonomous, if you just declare that you're an autonomous region, and Ottawa doesn't push back, you're now president of an autonomous region.
Right, which is the history, by the way, up until now, when everything that's been done, Ottawa has never pushed back, right?
Not lately, no, because it started with the first one was rewriting the British North America Act. So the Legault government said, okay, we've decided that since our Constitution is technically the Canadian Constitution, so the British North America Act, it also lays out the creation of Quebec in 1867, we've decided we can just rewrite it. So here's some notes for you, Ottawa. You're going to rewrite these. And Ottawa said, oh, that's a great idea. And then they said, well, we're not swearing an oath to the king anymore. Screw the king. And they're like, that's fine. Good for you. And then I think it was last year where the Legault government brought in a change to maid policy and said, well, in Quebec, if you have an advance directive, you can be euthanized if you're unconscious. And that goes well beyond federal maid guidelines. So if you do that anywhere in the country, that's homicide.
Right.
You don't have authorization to do that. So you had the Quebec government saying quite openly, well, okay, we're telling doctors to do it, and we're just telling prosecutors not to prosecute them for murder. So, you could read that as you essentially were telling Quebec Crown prosecutors in Quebec to not prosecute certain types of murder if it accorded with provincial policy.
That's one part of it, yeah, that I don't think anyone necessarily spent a lot of time calling that into question either. But then the other part of this that kind of stands out to me is, you're right, that under the terms of the Clarity Act, right, the Federal Clarity Act, the only way to legally secede from Canada is to secure, quote, a clear majority in a separation referendum. The question of a clear majority, that's like 50, this is going back to 1995 all over again, right? We had 50%, just under, less than 1% to decide the future of this province. And here we are again, not with this party, but Tristin, my question here becomes this. You have a party that said, we don't need to separate. We can do what we need to do to protect the French language. I'm speaking now of the CAQ, without even having to go to a referendum. But everything, it seems to me, in this Constitution, in this bill, is basically going in the same direction without even needing a referendum.
Yeah, I actually struggle to think of any sort of precedent where a province or any sort of subnational government just says, I'm just going to write a document with everything I want to do. And then, I guess maybe Louis Riel did this, where you just sort of, drop a document with everything you want and see if the army shows up and whether you can get away with it. So I can't say it's not brazen, but that is an interesting part of this Constitution. You're reading through all of this, and you're like, okay, so this is basically complete independence on everything, and then it rewrites the Clarity Act saying 50% plus one is going to be separation. So by the time I got to that point, I was like, why even bother going that final step? You're already doing whatever you want, and you still can show up to Ottawa if needed on occasion. So at that point, I don't know why you would go the full Monty for full separation. But anyway, the Constitution also makes that easier. So it's just everything you could ever possibly want if you're a Quebec nationalist in one document.
And it's worth remembering. It's worth remembering too that the CAQ have a majority. This is not, and I know opposition parties have complained about this. The Quebec bar has complained about this and threatening to do something. I'm not sure what they could do, but if they choose to go ahead, this is what we could be living with here. They do have a majority. So if you're staring down the barrel of being defeated by a separatist party, you just pass the de facto Separatism Act into law. See if the feds do anything about it. Because they're sort of testing, and we're seeing this. Quebec is doing the best job of it, as usual. But Quebec is sort of testing. We have a federal government that doesn't like enforcing laws. Really doesn't like that. Would rather just everybody just follow the law voluntarily. Doesn't like to do sort of the ugly side if you have to listen to the rules. So this, I would say, is one of the most brazen examples of, let's just go as far as we possibly can, and we'll see what happens. But can I just ask, with respect to Alberta, you said you know a lot more about what's going on there. There was a reference made here by the leader of the PQ to Alberta saying, hey, look, they're doing this and their issue doesn't involve language and they're going to separate anyway. How close are they, given what's gone on with respect to separation in Alberta?
How close are they to separating?
Yeah, I mean, how big is that voice?
Even if you ask hardcore separatists, and there's going to be, there's all different types of separatists, but the separatist organizers, I mean, if I point out to them, I mean, the polls show it's like 30% want to separate, so you don't have anywhere near the numbers that Quebec nationalists did, and they'll say, you know what, I know that, but people are so pissed off in Alberta, just wait a few months, and then we'll get that sort of 55, 60%. So I think the separatist playbook is that even if they don't have a majority, they're just waiting. They kind of like what's going on federally because, everything, anytime something happens that's dumb in Ottawa, that helps their cause. So they're just sort of waiting it out, and they don't think it's much longer until Albertans start to change. But it remains to be seen.
Last thing, just really, really quickly, and I should mention, what in this Constitution, from what you read, even acknowledges that, there's a territory here, an Indigenous territory, and they get to weigh in on this as well, or nothing?
It makes some references, so, they're full citizens of, they're welcome, and very similar to the language you saw in 1995. So, you're welcome, you're Quebecers, we're all going to have a great time together, we're going to respect, but nothing about we would assume the treaties and all that. So there's no recognition of Aboriginal title or Indigenous rights.
All right. We have to leave it at that. Tristin, I do appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Anytime. Thank you.
Take care. Tristin Hopper, reporter for the National Post. Yeah, check it out. I imagine we are going to be hearing more and more about this Constitution, this Bill 1. At least I hope so. Pretty serious.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.